Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you? It is Friday, December 16th, 2016. A couple of 16s. Pair of 16s. Go play the lottery that goes up to 16. Whatever chance you get to make a little money off the show. And then you can, of course, donate it, or at least part of it, to us via our Patreon link. Still looking for support, always looking for support, and always thankful for the support that we get. Thanks to everyone who has joined in. Thanks to everyone who has switched over from PayPal. Thanks to everyone who has switched over from PayPal, because I bothered them to do so yesterday. There are still a few of you remaining on PayPal, so I guess if I do this again a couple more times, you'll all eventually move over there. You're still well within tolerances. It's only been a couple of days since I asked you. But a reminder, the holidays are coming, and who knows what could happen between now and the end of the year. You could become distracted and forget. So I'll remind you again and again, and maybe in the new year I'll remind you even more, and I will offer up, I don't know, probably fake tote bags. You might be angry that you don't get your tote bag in thanks for a donation to the show, but then again, YOLO, nothing matters. There are no rules. LOL, Trump USA. I guess I can just start doing that. Plenty of things to follow up with today. And lots of stories, nothing dominating the discussion on Twitter this morning. However, lots of chatter this morning with Donald Trump. He woke up early again and started tweeting. He's angry at a couple of people. Apparently he's still a little bit angry at Evan McMullin for some unknown reason. He's continues to deny any connections with Russia or the Russian hacking, or even that there was Russian hacking. He's being extraordinarily generous, I must say, and a few people have noticed this and pointed this out. The only person for whom the presumption of innocence obtains with him is Vladimir Putin, of all people. Full page ads in the New York dailies insisting on the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who were eventually exonerated thanks to DNA evidence, which he still denies the validity of. But Vladimir Putin, how can you prove it? It could be, somebody in 400-pound guy sitting on their bed. We don't know. It could be China. You have no clue. That one? Yeah. That's the one that he's pretty sure that the guy's innocent until proven guilty. And, it's a standard we like to hold out there for people on trial in America anyway, which is not what we're dealing with right here. But hey, it always pays to be skeptical about things. But, it's probably about time for him to start saying, well, it could be provable. Let's look around. But that's just the responsible thing to do. The other thing about Trump that I was just reminded this morning by Amanda Marcotte tweeting a series of shots at Donald Trump and just the way he conducts his personal life, which ordinarily is out of bounds for these things, but that's what we've got with Donald Trump. I mean, his entire life has been personal life. Even his business dealings are basically an extension of his personal life. And it's all we have to take a look at. And I don't know, she was hearkening back to that old early 90s story about his very public breakup with Marla Maples, which was probably about the height of his public weirdness about his relationships. And, I don't know, just an old People magazine. But detailing the story of how he gave her a giant diamond ring and then insisted to the press, not to her, the press, that wasn't an engagement ring, and the engagement is off, and it never even was on in the first place, and I don't even care if she talks to the press, or rather, Donald truly doesn't care if she talks to the press. He doesn't care about her because this is John Miller speaking. That was the whole fake PR guy episode. Unbelievable. I mean, what kind of a psychopath does that? And I don't know. I was struck by the goofiness of his language, and just he's so childlike in the, I don't know, even the aspirations that his fake PR guy expresses. And who made this comment? Amber Hunt here saying, or asking me, am I having some sort of a stroke, or does the story repeatedly refer to Marla Maples as Maria? It does. The first couple times they keep saying Maria, and then they just switch over to Marla. The headline says Marla, but now you're seeing it right there. It's just a little bit weird. All right. Anyway, I just found that whole episode weird and disturbing, and in particular, just the part about where he, as John Miller, tells the pardon me, this frog in my throat is unbelievable this morning. He tells the reporter that not only is it off with Marla, not Maria Maples, but beautiful women are, what does he say? Important, beautiful women call him all the time, said Miller. It was a fascinating interview, this reporter said, made all the more fascinating when the reporter realized that the man she was talking to was, in fact, probably Donald Trump. So, I don't know. Imagine trying to get off the hook with that. Well, the engagement is off because beautiful, important women call me. What a loser. I mean, I don't know what else to say. This guy is a complete nutbag. And, he's president, or he's coming to be president of the United States. Isn't that terrific? Anyway, that is, of course, far from the most important story of the day. Just wanted to take a moment to remind you, I mean, on a personal level, where it really couldn't matter at all to anybody, he's still putting all of his time and all of his effort into talking to the press about basically talking about his wiener. Woo-wee, I'm so awesome. Check me out. This is how he defines his life. Who do I get to have sex with? Who do I want people to think I have sex with? This is what's on his mind. He's not going to be able to run the country. The idea that I can run the country and my business perfectly, 100%. He can't even, keep his pants on long enough he fantasizes every 5 seconds with somebody. And I mean, that's not entirely out of the ordinary for some men, but not the ones who, have the responsibility of leading the free world, whatever that even means anymore. And in his spare time, executive producing The Celebrity Apprentice. The guy is a complete loser, and we're stuck with him, and it's nuts. Okay, so moving on from there, important actual things happening, and a good reminder and a good comment from listeners. Let's see, it's already scrolled down my mentions column, which again is a good reason to remember to use the KITM hashtag Paxman, Paxxman, now tweeting under the username, if not address, No Surrender, and I appreciate that. But yeah, send me a note like this one. Says, don't forget the North Carolina Assembly doing its dirty deeds in secret. That's true. Big story of the day really is in North Carolina. The bigger story, of course, that nobody really regards it as the big story. And I don't mean nobody, because all of you do, but the rest of the world is yawning over it, which I will take to mean that, generally speaking, people do not care about process fights inside an organization like, inside the legislature, basically. We got them at some point to care about the filibuster because it was clear, one, it had a funny name, and two, people had heard of it and had some idea of what it was because Mr. Smith goes to Washington. And, we were able to get people to pay some attention to that, though it took a lot of organizing and a lot of pushing, and paying attention to what goes on inside the North Carolina state legislature is a lot harder, even than paying attention to what goes on in Congress, and people don't even want to do that. But by way of building on this story, before I even tell you in fullness what the story is down there, I just want to remind everybody that Nobody's watching. I mean, people in North Carolina are protesting, and that's part of the big story. People are protesting. They've turned out to the State House, to the Capitol. They're protesting. They're being arrested. And this is the kind of on-the-ground protest response that turned out to be so amazingly effective in North Carolina, thanks in large part, and maybe even exclusively, to the Moral Monday organizers, who we keep giving credit to, and I don't think we can ever do enough. And let me also take a moment then to critique the view, popular to some extent, even among allies and people I enjoy listening to and enjoy talking with on Twitter and elsewhere online, that protests are either outdated or don't work or too old school or aren't robust enough to stand up to the kind of piracy that Republicans are pulling off everywhere. And I can tell you this, again, as we said yesterday, progressivism by itself lost in the Senate race in Wisconsin. It lost in Zephyr Teachout's congressional race. It wins in places. I don't discount it as useless, obviously, and I believe in and agree with an awful lot of it from a policy and cultural standpoint. But, I guess whatever you would call pure electoral, let's be serious, but be serious from a progressive policy standpoint and just lay it out there and let the people decide kind of campaign, lost with a known quantity and a well-known quantity at that in Wisconsin's Senate race, and it won in North Carolina. Now, I guess you could argue the point, it won. What do you mean it won? Well, okay, that's not really true. Democrats won, and they won with a candidate who probably could not fairly be described as anything close to, as, I don't know what you would call it, purely progressive as the Russ Feingold platform and the Russ Feingold campaign. So that's comparing apples and oranges to some extent. But I guess when it comes down to the binary choice that we have at the moment, for better or for worse, despite what some of you are working for, and maybe one day you'll succeed, but we have the binary choice between Republicans and Democrats. And the Democrat won statewide in North Carolina, that southern state that doesn't matter because it's part of the Confederacy, and it lost in Wisconsin. And it lost bigly in Wisconsin at the top of the ticket and the next step down, too. So there is that. Anyway, they're out there doing the same thing again, protesting, being in the physical space and creating a story and drawing attention. And that's what it's supposed to do. And thank God they're doing it. I mean, that's heroic, what's going on down there. It just is, drawing our attention to that. Anyway, to use that as a building block to where I was going, one, don't hesitate to fight the way Republicans are fighting. Put Garland on the goddamn Supreme Court. And two, oh my God, we can't be the ones also breaking political norms. Oh my God, we can't do this. It's a legislative coup. There's a legislative coup going on in North Carolina. And it's not fair to say nobody notices because, of course, the heroes of the Moral Monday movement have noticed and are making a big deal of it, trying to get everybody else to notice. But generally speaking, the vast majority of America's public doesn't know, and if you brought it to their attention, they would say, I don't know. That's stuff that happens in suits and ties with gavels and rules, and I don't understand that stuff, and I never will, and they probably, they wouldn't do it if it was completely illegal or anything like, They make assumptions about these things, and I'm telling you, the opportunity is there. People will scream. Republicans will scream. They'll get stories in the paper. People will read the stories in the paper and say, oh my God. And they'll even write to their legislators saying this is outrageous. And then, no, the people will forget. Right? That's the line. And they will. They will. Take advantage of that. I'm telling you. It's, it's mean. It's hypocritical to say you take advantage of people's disconnect and distrust of politicians. That's what Donald Trump does, and it's disgusting. Yeah, well, in the meantime, we're getting killed. So I say, whatever. Pull the trigger on it as far as I'm concerned. So let's see. What can I round up by way of summaries of what's going on down in North Carolina? I mentioned to you, I read Daniel's article to you yesterday, but I've got another also from Daily Kos that will bring us up to date. And I think Daniel actually recommended this one on Twitter and said, if you really want the real rundown on what's going on there and how deep this goes, you should take a look at this piece. And here it is by Stephen Wolfe. North Carolina Republicans plot legislative coup against democracy to usher in a new era of Jim Crow. And, my gosh, I cannot shake this. I apologize for coughing in your ear, everybody, too. I tried to mute the thing, too, and it just didn't work. Whatever. Anyway, I just want to highlight the use of the phrase legislative coup, because when I described the January 3rd high noon maneuver to people, I got that response quite a bit. And it's not wrong. It's just, let me tell you about how many people care about legislative coups, and the answer is 0. The end, generally speaking, 0. It's not really 0, but it's effectively 0. So Stephen tells us what's going on in North Carolina. And look, he illustrates it with a photo of the Moral Mondays protests. And by the way, there's more parallels between North Carolina and Wisconsin that might as well be noted. First of all, I would be remiss in not pointing out that in Wisconsin, you had probably the first current day model of sustained protest of activity in the legislature and the governor's mansion that you had anywhere in the country. They were doing this on the street, real space, in your face protest against insurmountable odds first. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. So all credit due there. Although, in the end, it didn't prevail in putting Russ Feingold back in the Senate. That wasn't the end-all, be-all. They expended a lot of energy stopping a lot of bad things and not stopping a lot of bad things, too, but raising attention for it. And like I said, it was nearly insurmountable odds. And I think probably in large part, they'd probably acknowledge in the leadership of the Moral Monday movement that they took a lot of inspiration from Wisconsin, because their Moral Mondays protests were designed to be sustained protests, returning, every Monday, and I guess recognizing the need for people to get on with their lives in the meantime. But the idea of a sustained, ongoing protest that never really went away, I think probably drew a lot of inspiration from Wisconsin. So it's not the case that Wisconsin did it poorly and lost, and North Carolina did it better and won. It's just the case that some places you win and some places you lose, and both places, though, I think demonstrated the power of sustained protest that's well directed. I think it was a little bit more focused in North Carolina just by happenstance, perhaps, that you happen to have the original idea of sustained, organized, protest-style pushback put forward by someone who was in a position to take leadership reins and run with it and give it the narrative that it needed, whereas Wisconsin's pushback was more diffuse. It was perhaps broader based, and in that sense, potentially more powerful. But I think they were also building off of the Occupy Wall Street energy in turn, and the model was still diffuse and power sharing and no leadership kind of a thing. And I'm not even willing to dismiss that as a model, at least as a starting point. But I guess you could say the track record in terms of pulling off electoral wins is about what a lot of the punditry, I guess you could say, expected. Maybe they were right about that one. If you can't organize and this leadership model and you stay out of politics consciously, it's going to be awfully difficult to deliver change in political results. And I think we all knew that was a possibility. Anyway, I should get down to Stephen Wolf's actual article so we can share the news about what's going on there and comment on that for a while before I get into too much trouble with people from Wisconsin. Last month, Democrat Roy Cooper unseated Republican Governor Pat McCrory, while Democrats also gained a majority on the state Supreme Court, breaking the Republican stranglehold on North Carolina's state government. Now, though, Republicans have used the pretext of a lame duck special legislative session, ostensibly convened for disaster relief. You remember that one. And I don't know whether they ever came through with a disaster relief bill, by the way. To introduce a slew of measures that radically curtail the authority of the governor and even the high court itself. This nakedly partisan plot is unprecedented in modern state history. Indeed, you have to go back to the 1890s to find a parallel, when reactionaries violently introduced Jim Crow after a multiracial coalition of progressives briefly won power. The scope of the GOP's war on democracy is stunning, Stephen writes. The Republican proposals would remove the governor's party's control over all state and county boards of election. We read about that yesterday. They would require state Senate approval for the governor's cabinet appointees. And that's a brilliant one because, again, you're playing with people's assumptions about the state government following the federal model, and I guess it wasn't true. I believe that's one that they could probably have gotten away with all by itself. They would require state Senate approval for the governor's cabinet appointees. One bill would slash the governor's number of executive branch appointees from 1,500 to 300. Another eliminates the governor's ability to appoint members of the State Board of Education and the University of North Carolina. One more measure would make state Supreme Court races partisan and require state constitutional challenges to first go before the Republican-dominated State Court of Appeals. Republicans might still even outright pack the Supreme Court to regain their majority. Legislative Republicans under Governor Pat McCrory had already put North Carolina on the front lines of the battle against voting rights. Almost immediately after the Supreme Court gutted a key provision of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, McCrory signed America's most sweeping voter suppression law in half a century, which included strict voter ID requirements, the end of same-day registration, and cutbacks on early voting opportunities. And of course, you'll recall this part. Republicans literally ordered data on which voting methods black voters used more and eliminated them. This law was so extreme that a federal court said it targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision when it was struck down in July. By the way, let's see, I want to mention, I see Cliff Schechter has just noticed, I guess, retweeting Mike Byers' tweet here saying main priority should be appointing a SCOTUS justice so that we have a semblance of checks and balances. Obama mustn't defer. And it's nice of him to say, agree 100%, either a recess appointment or via the scenario that Kagro X, laid out. Anything less is capitulation or endorsement of an extremist power grab of the type going on in North Carolina right now, as a matter of fact. And believe me, in the end, there's a pretty high likelihood nobody notices in the end, despite the protests. And I would never tell you not to do it because those have actually been effective. It's the only thing happening that has any hope right now of raising awareness even and finding, if they think that there's a more effective method of pushback, you're not going to find it without the resistance happening in the streets and in the halls of the Capitol right now. That's the only thing focusing attention on these issues. I'm just saying, I say people don't notice as a method of encouraging legislative Democrats to push back where they have the opportunity to do so and not to worry about the fact that, yeah, if everybody in America sat down over coffee and decided whether or not this was an outrageous power grab, even the things I'm prescribing for the Congress, the answer would be yes. I'd tell you yes. Sure. Do I think this is a good idea? No. Horrible precedent? Yes. So what? So, just literally, to your face, so what? Not only do people not notice, even the people who do it, whose hands cast the very votes that constitute the legislative coup, forget that they've done these things. I mean, I'll just one side note from this whole thing about the nuclear option, harkening back to the old nuclear option days, right? The pure nuclear option, the beginning of a new Congress magic session in which you can use general parliamentary law to break the filibuster and force through rules change, right? That was used in 1975 to change the cloture rules from requiring 2/3 vote down to a 3/5 vote. In other words, 67 down to 60. And even then, it wasn't enough. But okay. So that was in 1975 that they finally changed that, and it became 3/5 vote instead of 2/3. And they used the nuclear option, the underlying theory of the availability of general parliamentary law to shut down debate about the changes to the rules on the first day, right at the beginning of a new Congress in 1975. And that required a series of procedural votes on the floor early in January in 1975. And senators had to go on the record saying, should you be allowed to use these strange old rulings from the chair from two previous vice presidents to leverage an opportunity at the beginning of a new Congress to shut down debate by majority vote so that you can push through filibuster reform? And the answer was yes. And that wasn't all that long ago. And there were members of the Senate who voted to do that in 1975 when they were young, new-ish senators who by 2009, 2010, 2011, 12, 13, when they were being asked to do so again, were apoplectic. Oh, you can't do this. That's an enormous disruption in the Senate. What a precedent it would set. Oh, my God, it would turn us into the House. It can't be done. You don't understand how things work. Dude, you did this. Pat Leahy, you were there in 1975. You cast that vote. Joe Biden, you were there in 1975. You cast that vote because your leadership told you it was important and you were young and you didn't know, and now you're the leadership. Okay, fine. Have you learned some things along the way? Sure, great. It's entirely possible to change your mind about these things, but you guys forget. And then by around 2013, when it was being threatened again before you actually did it, and Joe Biden, you were out by then, of course, still hemming and hawing. And you had done it since. In 2011, you pulled the exact same maneuver in the middle of a session and nobody noticed because it wasn't about changing filibuster rules. It was about changing the rules around suspension of the rules requests and repetitive ones that are stupid and dilatory, but which you're nonetheless able under the rules to request, and you were being driven crazy by them by Republican ideologues who were using them to slow down all the floor procedures. And guess what happened? Right in the middle of everything, Harry Reid said, you know what? Let's just have a vote. And let's just have the chair rule that a majority can say, screw you, the new rule is no more of these stupid dilatory suspension of the rules requests when you know you have no chance in hell of getting the rules suspended on something like this. And they just did it. And boom. And God, did nobody ever notice that one? I mean, did you remember? I remembered. But that's because I was intimately tied up in it. But there's a trivia question for you. No one will ever remember that. Are you crazy? And then they went ahead and did this. And they did the nuclear option and changed the filibuster rules. And everybody said, rah, 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 rah. And then it wasn't so interesting anymore. And now Republicans are actually excited about it. So congratulations to them. Nobody cared. Nobody cared that they did it in the middle of the session either. I told them, up front, well, at least you got some basis in constitutional thinking, and you have some prior rulings from the chair, and everybody's sort of been prepared for the idea that at the beginning of a new Congress, it's just kind of acceptable, generally speaking, to say, well, we're going to set some new rules ahead of time and then follow those rules during the session, not change the rules whenever we run into a problem. But they went right ahead and did that. And people didn't even care about that either. I mean, they noticed that it was done. Certainly everybody noticed that happened. But they didn't, one, they weren't burning anything in the streets. Two, the Senate didn't turn into the House, whatever that's supposed to mean. And three, nobody noticed that they abandoned the whole foundation of the constitutional claim underlying their ability to do this. Well, they went with another constitutional claim, the right of each house to set its own rules of procedure. That's the most naked power there is, and they just did it, which is all I'm asking them to do now with Merrick Garland. Admittedly, slightly flashier, and there will be incoming members of the Senate who will, and I guess maybe, sort of, kind of, that could be. I mean, the nuclear option left raw nerves on the other side regardless. They felt taken advantage of. So people will think they were taken advantage of here too. Yeah, and they'll be repeat players and you're going to have to sit with them for the next couple of years. Yeah, life's rough. You don't like it? I guess run for a different office. I don't know. Anyway, I promised you Stephen Wolf's writing, and I stopped just to rant about something else. That's the show. What can you do? All right, where did we leave off? We were listing the many ways in which Pat McCrory had already put, as he says, North Carolina on the front lines of the battle against voting rights, right? And noting quite importantly, quite accurately, that the North Carolina voter restrictions were found by federal courts to have targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. Remember that? Republicans had previously also gerrymandered their legislatures so aggressively that they won veto-proof majorities in 2012 despite losing the popular vote that year. How about that? And they easily maintained them in 2016 despite McCrory's loss. A court in 2016 struck down those maps as unconstitutional racial gerrymanders, meaning that North Carolina Republicans are right now in the middle of this legislative coup, using an illegally obtained legislative majority to usurp the powers of the fairly elected new Democratic governor. You can't gerrymander a governor, right? He won statewide. They're using a gerrymandered map found by federal courts to be unconstitutional, requiring them to run their elections over again next year. But at the moment, the people who are there, well, gee, and here, that's an excellent parallel. I mean, it's obviously not exact, but we've just found out that the people who are sitting in the North Carolina state legislature now are there by virtue of having unconstitutionally gerrymandered their own districts. They ought, by rights, not to be there to constitute the North Carolina state legislature. But while we are, and nobody else has control of the gavel and can put forth any legitimate claim to being a shadow legislature or the new North Carolina state legislature, and we have to admit that in the Senate scenario, it would be considerably different. There are people sitting there with certificates of election waiting to be sworn in and recognized. That is a major thing. But look, the issue is, in some ways, very similar. People who shouldn't be there, or who some people think shouldn't be there, or shouldn't constitute the current body, are saying, well, this thing I'm holding in my hand, the gavel, says who constitutes the current body. That, and of course my ability to ask the body sitting here, do you constitute the body? Now, generally speaking, I think it's pretty easy to say, easy to predict. The answer from the body will be, yes, we do represent the body. And it is stupid and self-referential. Yeah, they're doing it, and you're suffering for it. You have the opportunity to knock them back. You want to take it? No? All right. Well, it's very high-minded of you. Republicans, as we said, had previously gerrymandered the legislature so aggressively that it was unconstitutional, and they had won veto-proof majorities in 2012 and 2016, despite losing the popular vote both times and now losing the governorship. Democracy, of course, relies on electoral losers recognizing the legitimacy of the victor, and this breathtaking power grab can only be described as a full-blown legislative coup d'etat designed to subvert democracy itself. Below, we examine the details of each of the GOP's proposals. So, do I feel bad, by the way, about recommending a legislative coup d'etat when we know that legislative coup d'etats are designed to subvert democracy itself? Well, now wait a minute. Are they? They do subvert democracy. Are they designed to do that? North Carolina's appears to be designed to do just that. A legislative coup in the Senate, as I'm describing it, of course, is designed anyway, from my view, and there will be others who differ, but meant to restore the democratic norm of a president in his last year of office being able to nominate a Supreme Court justice and have the nomination considered and voted on. That's it. It's not happening. I'd like to restore that, but they say no. If I do it by legislative coup d'etat, well, it's not my preferred method, but ask again next year whether anybody remembers. And as long as we know that they won't remember, it's honestly how you sit there and let that be done to you over and over again and say, but next time they'll notice, or every time it's really bad and they'll pay for it, I don't know what, in the legislative afterlife, I guess. All right. Important stuff to do here. Stephen now details the breathtaking badness, I guess, to put together a really spectacular word like breathtaking, and badness, like that is not good. So it falls flat to say things that way. Anyway, here's what they're up to. On the topic of state and county boards of election. Under current state law, the governor's party controls the state board of election with a 3-2 majority, and it also controls all 100 county election boards with a 2-1 majority. After Republicans took power in 2013 with McCrory's victory, they used control over these election boards to engage in sweeping voter suppression efforts. They removed polling places from college campuses and heavily minority communities as a way to make voting far more inconvenient for Democratic-leaning voters who often lack transportation options. After a federal court this year ordered the restoration of a week of early voting that the Republicans had eliminated in their sweeping 2013 voter suppression law, Republicans on the State Board of Elections urged counties to implement changes to limit early voting hours, which they were able to do because the Republicans held majorities on all of those local boards. You see? The newest Republican proposal, though, would create an 8-member state elections board with 4 members from each party. Oh, fair, right? 4 from each. It's so fair. And therefore requiring a supermajority, a supermajority of 6 votes to take any action. Well, that ain't happening. They would similarly create 2-2 partisan splits among all 100 county boards. Instead of 3-2, it'll be 2-2 on those county boards. Consequently, any action Democrats might want to take in order to expand access to voting would be subject to a Republican veto. Furthermore, Republicans are trying to prevent the state board from having any involvement with redistricting. Last month, a federal court ordered the state to redraw its unconstitutional legislative districts and hold special elections next year under new maps. That means North Carolina Republicans could lose their veto-proof legislative majorities next year. The State Elections Board provides important election data to map makers, so Republicans would literally make it harder for new maps to be drawn. You understand that one? That's I mean, it's clear, but I sort of flickered in the middle of that. But yeah, so the maps are unconstitutional. They have to redistrict. The maps are drawn based on data provided to the State Elections Board or from the state elections board, to the people who actually will draw the maps. But now the elections board that provides that data will be paralyzed by being split 4-4 and requiring a supermajority to do anything, like provide that data, I guess. I mean, the request will come in. They could simply answer it, but instead someone will move the question, make up a question as to how, well, maybe there's some question as to how we should answer this request, or whether we should answer the request at all. I mean, I guess you could raise that as an issue and say, now clearly we should, but we should have an official vote on it. And oh my goodness, we're tied, and you need a 6-vote majority to do anything, so we never officially agreed to provide that data, so we won't. So the maps have to get drawn anyway, but there just won't be any data involved in them. But don't worry, because the people drawing the map are likewise probably, well, I don't know. It doesn't say who the map drawing authority is, but they can just guess. And gosh, it's not our fault we guessed wrong. There was no data to go on. It's just weird that we happened to guess that the exact same districts would probably work better next time, but you can't prove that they won't because there's no data to be had. Wouldn't that be interesting? Republicans are spinning this radical change as a bid to promote bipartisan fairness, but the goal is simply to create gridlock. If this change were truly about fairness, Republicans would have passed it when they assumed power in 2013, not only because they lost it in 2016. If they love fairness, they should have implemented fairness when they had the ability to implement anything they wanted. But then, of course, I guess you could argue, well, we're doing that now. It's just late, that's all. We just decided to spend the last 3 years under an unfair regime. It just happened to advantage us. But okay. Now, in the case of executive appointments, North Carolina's governor has the power to appoint the heads of key departments concerning transportation, natural resources, the environment, and more. Republicans have introduced a measure to require that these posts be subject to state Senate approval, where, of course, they have that veto-proof majority. So, it ought to be difficult for the governor to get anybody appointed. Since the legislature is hopelessly gerrymandered to produce a Republican majority, that simply means Republicans would institutionalize a veto over any Democratic appointees. An unconstitutional one at that. Similarly, Republicans would slash the number of executive branch appointees from roughly 1,500 to 300 after McCrory took over from Democratic Governor Bev Perdue in 2013. The Republican legislature dramatically increased the number of these appointees, meaning this reversal is a transparently cynical ploy to retain power. That would leave Republican officials in charge of key regulatory decisions. To give you a sense of the kinds of things the Republicans would target, the legislature even tacked on a measure to abolish car emissions testing requirements to this package. Republicans would also completely eliminate the governor's authority to appoint members of the State Board of Education and to the UNC System's Board of Governors. Under McCrory, Republicans have tried to eviscerate public education so that they could privatize and profiteer off of it. Their proposal would give the legislature itself the authority to appoint board members and would transfer other powers to the Superintendent of Public Instruction, who is, of course, a Republican elected official. How about on the state Supreme Court? Democrats won a 4-3 majority on the nominally nonpartisan state Supreme Court in 2016 for the first time in well over a decade. Congratulations, a hard-fought victory, well deserved. We're taking it away from you. So I guess they run on lines that are not designated as one party or another, but it's usually, I'm sure, well known which party certain candidates for the justices are affiliated with, and I guess that's enough. And they're going to make it, I guess, are they going to make it openly partisan? Let's see, we'll read on. Republicans almost immediately began contemplating packing the court with 2 more justices who would be appointed, not elected, by McCrory, who just lost right before he leaves office, which, of course, would be anathema in the federal legislature, where a duly elected president isn't allowed to nominate anyone to the Supreme Court in their last full year of their term, and had Hillary Clinton won, ever. But a lame duck defeated governor on his way out the door can do so, and do 2 of them. All right. Got it. Let's not fight. Okay, so 2 more justices who would be appointed by McCrory right before he leaves office. Although Republican leaders have denied they plan to follow through with this ploy, and I guess we still have to wait to see whether that comes to fruition or not, they offered no hint before Election Day about their current agenda to limit the governor's powers so court packing can't be ruled out. Even if Republicans don't proceed on that front, though, they have nonetheless introduced a bill that would curtail the court's authority. Currently, appeals concerning state constitutional matters go directly before the state Supreme Court. Of course, they're the experts, right? The latest Republican bill would have those legal matters get heard first by the state Court of Appeals, where Republicans hold a commanding majority, and would limit the sort of appeals the Supreme Court can hear. And again, they might even get away with that one, too, because, again, it differs considerably from the federal system, and in ways that people have come to understand, to the extent that they understand anything, that it makes a certain amount of sense in the federal system, and why shouldn't the North Carolina system be the same way, stopping at the appeals court first? I think they might be able to get away with that one. But it has its own interesting twists. And by the way, if the Republicans in Congress, or rather in the North Carolina state legislature, were, as we discussed yesterday, with the idea of installing McCrory directly back in the governor's mansion, despite having lost, that they found, politically speaking, too hot to handle. If they should also find court packing too hot to handle, you need to take a cue from that too. It's not to say that it won't be regarded differently in Congress or at the federal level or among the Republicans who make it to the federal level. But, again, just referring back to the January 3rd high noon idea, right? One, we found out people generally just don't rise up very powerfully in opposition. Certainly there's protests. People showed, no doubt about it. But I don't think it'll be the protests eventually putting a stop to the special session in the North Carolina state legislature. It'll be, well, we've done all we can do, so it's time for us to leave. It will have been protested, and they will have noticed the protest, and the protest may have slowed some things down. They may have thought they could get away with court packing and or possibly installing McCrory in office, but for the protests, and you can credit them with that. But if in the end they find it too hot to handle to both install McCrory and pack the courts, take note, because what's being offered up as one of the chief consequences, the terrible consequences that could come from blowing up the Senate by installing Merrick Garland at the last minute, or perhaps at the first minute, depending on how you look at it. Well, surely the Republicans would, and this is a good suggestion. It's very true that they might respond with an expansion of the Supreme Court, which, after all, takes only a legislative act, and packing the court with new Trump appointees to overcome the advantage, if that's indeed what it would be, that comes from installing Merrick Garland as the 9th Justice. Could they? Sure. Is the option there? Sure. Do we think they're bold enough to do it? Well, we think so. But if the example of North Carolina shows us that in the end they're really just not, then maybe that's something we can extrapolate to the federal level. It's different people, different circumstances, different stakes, to be sure. But it's a good hint. That's all I can tell you. Anyway, we did find out that even if they don't do that, they'll be trying to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and make sure that constitutional cases stop at the heavily Republican Court of Appeals first. What else? Republicans would also make the Supreme Court races openly partisan, stemming from their belief that incumbent Republican Justice Bob Edmonds only lost the 2016 election to Democrat Mike Morgan because candidates were not identified by party labels on the ballot, and Morgan was listed first. They might very well be right that they would have prevailed in a partisan race, but that makes this change all the more obscene. It's flagrantly motivated by power and not democratic principles of any kind. Republicans had previously tried to switch Supreme Court races to retention elections ahead of 2016, where incumbents would simply face a yes or no vote. That ploy came about only after Republicans had spent millions trying to oust every remaining Democratic justice in the 2014 election cycle. The switch to retention elections was a transparent bid to protect Justice Edmonds from defeat, but fortunately the state Supreme Court itself found that the change violated the state constitution. Well, one of the rare breakthrough moments there for them, I guess. The Supreme Court is so critical because it's the only state institution standing in the way of Republican efforts to abrogate the governor's powers. Democrats have promised to sue, and election law expert Rick Hasen thinks they might have a strong case in both state and federal court. Yet, if Republicans succeed in packing the Supreme Court in North Carolina, the justices who wind up on the bench, thanks to such a court-packing scheme, could get to rule on the legality of the law that put them there in the first place. It's dizzying. The High Court will also play a crucial role in the next round of legislative redistricting, of course, following the 2020 census. That would be for federal offices, federal Congress districts, because the governor has no ability to veto new maps. The current Democratic majority could curtail any future Republican gerrymanders, which is why the Republicans want so badly to eliminate it. And lastly, the new Jim Crow. In sum, a legislature that owes its existence to an unconstitutional gerrymander is trying to usurp the powers of a governor who is fairly elected by the people. Republicans are deeming any attempt at governance by the Democratic Party, as illegitimate and are taking extreme actions, any that they can, to prevent Democrats from exercising any political power. As we noted at the outset, there's no precedent for this power grab in modern U.S. history, though you could use it as precedent later, but the GOP's behavior is strongly reminiscent of the reactionary backlash to North Carolina's populist flourishing in the mid-1890s when a coalition of white progressives and black voters briefly took power. White supremacists violently overthrew the multiracial local government in the city of Wilmington in an 1898 coup d'etat. The state legislature soon followed up with a raft of measures that prevented African Americans from voting, a bondage they were not released from until the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, later thrown out in 2013 by our own U.S. Supreme Court, which is not important, and we shouldn't bother installing anyone like Merrick Garland on it. Republicans are fighting to usher in a new era of Jim Crow, and what we are witnessing now in North Carolina is simply a bid to overturn democracy itself. Okay, well put, I think. And succinct in describing the bills that we know of so far down in North Carolina. Now, let's see. Another theme available, well, there's a million things available for discussion. Here is a bad one. I guess I'll just add this in, since riffing off of the coup d'etat idea. Rich Lowry, Starburst's Rich Lowry, has an opinion piece in Politico magazine entitled Against an Electoral Coup, speaking, of course, about the Electoral College, and I feel like I have to offer some thoughts on that one. One, Rich Lowry wrote it, so it's wrong-footed from the beginning, but we'll have an open mind. I'll rapidly close it, don't worry. Surely, there were alarmists who thought 2016 might end in an undemocratic coup, but who predicted Democratic opinion leaders would be the ones agitating for it? Yes, that's right. It is the coup that's being agitated for is being agitated by Democratic opinion leaders, and I'll cop to my part of the coup, though I don't know that you're going to be able to get me to admit that it is in pursuit of undemocratic ideals, because it's not, but I'm sure you think it is. Anyway, for fear that Donald Trump will violate democratic norms, liberals want to have the Electoral College throw out the results of a presidential election and impose their choice on the nation for the first time in our history. And Well put for arguing your side of things, of course, but it's not a matter of throwing out the results of a presidential election. It's about living with the consequences of living with the consequences of an antiquated electoral college system that was designed to actually give them that ability, and which you've slowly chipped away at in the intervening years by trying legally to bind the votes of some members of the Electoral College, but not all of them. Equal protection. We'll have to figure out how we deal with that. But he goes on, Lowry does, to say the hypocrisy is rather astonishing. A major theme of the Democrats and the press during the election was, reasonably enough, the absolute imperative of accepting the results. Here, of course, we have to quibble about what the results are. And we can do that, of course, on several levels. Are the results, when we say the people have spoken, and by a margin of nearly 3 million, they said Hillary Clinton should be the next president. But we don't work that way. We work with an electoral college. So, hey, suckers, you lose, despite the fact that Donald Trump lost the vote overwhelmingly. He's going to be president because electoral college, and you just have to suck it up and live with that. Okay. Stage 2, the electoral college shows up, and they vote differently than you expected. What? That's outrageous. We can't have that. That's not supposed to happen. Dude, you're the one that just told me 5 seconds ago that we have to live with it. Suck it up. You lost. Admit it. This is our system. The electoral college is what determines things, not the popular vote. And we said, all right. And then here comes the electoral college, and they vote differently than you expect. What? How could they? No, it had. Why? And, in the end, of course, we discussed this yesterday. The likelihood that even with an electoral college revolt, larger than any we expect to be able to muster, by the way, you'll still end up sending the names Donald Trump and presumably Hillary Clinton and probably at least one more, if not 5 more, to the House of Representatives, dominated by Republicans, and ask them who should be president from among the top 3 vote getters according to the rules, if rules matter at all, and we're not even sure that's the case. And in the end, Republicans will be Republican, and they'll elect Donald Trump. And I'm okay with that in the sense that if it's to be Trump, let it be Trump, and have the fingerprints of members of Congress who will stand for election in 2 years on it. Make having Donald Trump be the president the direct fault of the 240 Republicans, 241, I think, Republicans in the House of Representatives, and frankly, anybody else who's challenging for election on the basis of being a Republican in 2018. I want to go to Washington, D.C. and join the party that installed the disastrous Donald Trump as president, which we hope we all hope is something that has manifested itself clearly by that point, but yet we're all still alive and having elections. But we hope for his success. We hope for the success of the country. And we hope for his failure. I think that's fair enough to say. I'm certainly not the first one to say it, even if I'm the first one to say it about Donald Trump. It's been said plenty about Barack Obama, so you can stick it if that's your complaint. No one here is complaining. Anyway, that's really what's at issue here. And to me, yeah, all I'm really asking for is, he terms this an electoral coup. If 37, this was tweeted out yesterday under the billing of 37 members of the Electoral College can, declare a coup and deny Trump the presidency. 37 of them, well, first of all, that's how many it would take, of course, to bring him underneath the 270 mark, which would mean that the election would be thrown to the House of Representatives. But that by itself doesn't deny Donald Trump the presidency. That would be up to the members of the House. Anyway, my point really was that another way of looking at this is 37 electors can take a confusing situation like this, wherein the so-called winner lost by nearly 3 million votes, and by that time, who knows whether it'll even be over 3 million votes. I don't know how many votes are left to count. But the winner loses by 3 million votes, and he's an idiot, and his national security advisor is a spy, and he's bringing a junta of military leaders with him, and and he'll be constitutionally ineligible under the emoluments clause, and he's corrupt AF as well, and has innumerable conflicts of interest, violating nepotism laws, and is generally a complete shambles. Oh, and he's in bed with Russia. So, hey, whatever. All these other things that make him constitutionally ineligible. And all we're saying here is 37 members of the Electoral College can say, listen, it's not really up to us. I understand that. It is, technically speaking, we could go ahead and elect somebody else. But that's too much for us. We're not all about the whole Electoral College coup thing. What we're doing is saying, look, our system would have you believe that Donald Trump is going to be the president. Okay, fine. Okay, if you think it's too destabilizing to consider anybody else at this stage. All we're saying is Donald Trump can be president, but it's going to have to be on somebody else. We're not going to be the ones to say yes to it. We know you will. Now, you might change your mind at the last minute. But all we're saying is we think it would be slightly more democratic at this point to say, rather than, okay, if it's really our responsibility to cast these votes, we just want backup. That's all. We're fine with installing him as president if that's the decision that's going to be made. But given the fact that Russia is accused of hacking the elections, or however you want to express this, and I think that's probably a poor expression of what they did. Hacking the election to make it sound like they hacked into voting machines, and that hasn't yet been proven, though there actually are people seriously working on that as an accusation. That's a little more difficult to believe, and we'll have to see some better evidence of that. But okay, we all understand that what they meant was influencing the election through various means, including hacking and releasing stolen materials, etc., right? Okay. So, given all of that, given that it's Russia that was doing it, and we have traditionally had some difficulty seeing eye to eye, despite the changes in Russia, with the Russians, and the various other indications that just generally speaking, Donald Trump is ill-suited to assume this office and may never rise to the level of becoming any better suited to assuming this office. We want, two-factor authentication, we'll call it, like they use for email these days. People voted. They said Hillary Clinton. But they elected us, the electors. So we have the opportunity, and some would say the obligation, to say, yes, the people voted for Hillary Clinton, but we, the electors, say no, we vote for Donald Trump. But that feels undemocratic. So what we would like to do is, we can't throw it back to the people at this point. Very, very unlikely. But what we can do is throw it to their directly elected representatives. Now, some people might say those are us, and they are. They are directly elected representatives of the people. Not that everybody understands that that's exactly what they're doing, but people understand it for Congress anyway. And after all, you guys are repeat players. You will stand, most of you, for re-election in 2018, whereas we will not. Even if we are electors again next time, you won't see our names on the ballot again, if you ever see them, until 2020. And in all likelihood, it'll be someone else anyway. You guys are the repeat players. You guys are the ones who are responsive to individual districts. You decide. You don't have to pick somebody new. All we're saying is, if the people say Hillary and we say Trump, we need somebody else to say Trump too before we go ahead with it. And we're passing it to you. It wouldn't be in your hands unless the 37 of us said so. Right? But that's all we're doing. We're not saying no to Donald Trump. We're saying yes to having you weigh in on it. I love the idea of passing this off to the Congress at this point. Because, hell, I'll try anything at this point. I really don't think it comes out different. I really don't think that they pick somebody different or come up with a Republican compromise. Although people worry, well, what if it's Mike Pence? He's even worse. Yeah, he may be. But you know what? I have a feeling, as conservative as he is, he at least understands, you gotta actually run this place as a government. And you can't, he's not gonna have he has a daughter, right? He's not going to install her in the East Wing, is he? He's not going to be making international hotel deals in the middle of all this. He may yet. Maybe Donald Trump should agree to it. It may very well be the case that Mike Pence is so grateful for ending up in the presidency that he starts implementing international deals that inure strictly to the benefit of the Trump organization and its international holdings, and Donald Trump is off the hook for the conflicts of interest because he's not in office. That may very well work. You'd really have to do a lot of investigative work to prove quid pro quos on that score, and I think you might even be able to get away with proving it too. But I'd rather have that be the outcome. Anyway, is there even anything left in, I don't know if there's any point in going forward with Rich Lowry's piece other than as a launching pad for my own discussion here. Let's see. He says the hypocrisy is astonishing. I'd say it's not, except on his part. A major theme of the Democrats and the press during the election was the absolute imperative of accepting the results. But let's be clear about what the results are. The results are we're sending these people to the Electoral College to make a final determination. And they have instead said, under this provision of the Constitution, we feel that the final determination should be made by Congress. And we're exercising our powers as electors to make sure that they're included in the decision making. I think that's an eminently reasonable way of describing it. Don't you love it? This lasted as a bedrock principle of democratic governance all the way until roughly 4 a.m. Wednesday, November 9th, when it became clear that Trump had won, and angry protests in the streets, pointless, harassing recounts, and calls for an electoral college coup became the order of the day. In theory, 37 electors could flip against Trump on December 19th, deny him the 270 electoral votes needed to win, and precipitate one of the gravest constitutional crises in the history of the Republic. Which it's not. Because, of course, it's happened twice before that somebody has ended up without an electoral majority. Though I guess that was said to have happened more organically. But I don't know. If you spin out the scenarios, it's hard to see how Trump would actually be denied the presidency. So who cares? He actually writes. I'll add the who cares. Frankly, I view it this way. If you are contemplating becoming one of these so-called Hamilton electors and voting against Trump in order to deny him the electoral majority and throw it to the House, and you are being prevailed upon not to do it, and the argument is, why are you wasting your time? You know it's only going to end up going to the House and then being Donald Trump anyway, so why would you bother with such nonsense? Why risk constitutional crisis only to end up with Trump anyway? And the answer I would give you, of course, I've already argued as to why it would be best for us if the Congress weighed in on these things. But let me add this twist. If you're worried and you're not sure should you do such a momentous thing, and somebody says, well, why would you do that? Why sweat it when it's only going to be Trump anyway? Let me suggest the exact opposite. Don't sweat it because it's going to be Trump anyway. It's a freebie. It's a free vote. You're not going to affect my vote probably won't even affect the outcome, but I'm required to vote because normally that just means you stay home and sit on your hands if you're that cynical. But okay, you're a member of the Electoral College. You're a regular voter, right? So you're going to cast your vote. Well, don't do it because it'll be a constitutional crisis. Really? What do you think the outcome of this constitutional crisis will be? The person that we expected to become president will become president. So it sounds like it's a safe thing for me to experiment with then, isn't it? No, it's actually quite dangerous. Oh, is it? Because you just said Donald Trump would be president no matter what I do. Well, I did say that, but what I meant was, what you meant was you didn't want anybody serious to think that it was Congress that had to install Trump as president, even though we all just saw him do it. Well, that's fascinating. But the reality is we have the ability to ask Congress to weigh in on this, and I'm going to. And that's how I view it. My 37 electoral votes that flip aren't a constitutional or electoral coup. It's an invitation to make the process more inclusive. When there's a question of the guy who's assuming the presidency being connected to an international Russian spy ring, an espionage operation, plus having innumerable conflicts of interest and violating the emoluments clause on day one, plus anti-nepotism laws on top of it all, plus he's a child molester on top of all of that. Yeah, I think I want, what did we say? I don't know, I forget the stupid email verification. Damn it. How come I blank on that stupid phrase? Anyway, two-factor authorization. Yeah, there we go. All right. Is that a bad thing to want? Anyway, the rest of it is mostly just yammering about how liberals suck, essentially. And there's probably very little point in getting ourselves agitated about anything else that Rich Lowry has to say on the subject. And it being 12 past 10, if you're listening live, we probably ought to move on to some of the other subjects that might be of interest before we hear from Josie Duffy Rice, who is scheduled, as usual, to drop by on a Friday. I don't know whether, we leave things sort of loose and open because Friday can be kind of a crazy day for everybody, but it's generally a good day to have Josie come on, and we usually hear from her in the last half hour or so, and so we still have time there. But there are a couple other issues that I picked up on that I thought we might add into the mix for today. And gosh, there's a lot. And I'll never catch up on, maybe I need to spend the weekend catching up on what's the latest on the Russia stuff. Because also it seems to me, and I've seen hinted at on Twitter, and I really haven't seen articles establishing, the parameters here and really fleshing out what's been said. But it seems like people are reporting a kind of shift in the focus of the White House with respect to the hacking and the cooperation with the Trump transition. It seems like the cooperation phase may be coming to an end, and we might be entering the zero F's phase of the Obama exit from the White House. There might be a shift toward, okay, the only thing we can do at this point is release some more information about what we suspect the Russians are up to. They're certainly changing the formulation of things, hinting, or in some cases saying outright, but now, that they believe that the hacking, the direction of the hacking had to have involved the personal assent of Vladimir Putin himself in all of this, and that Trump was aware of all of this as well. It's becoming indisputable that, to come to the conclusion that Trump was aware of all this, he references it in the middle of the campaign. But that wasn't where I intended to go with this, but that's something we're all going to have to spend the weekend catching up on and wrapping our heads around. Where I did want to go, just sort of different direction. I saw tweeted around this morning, last thing I tucked into pocket, that reminded me of something else I've had tucked into pocket for some time, although it's going to be difficult to dig it up. Jamel Bouie's piece in Slate today called Brothers in White Resentment, and it was a subtitle that grabbed me here. What gave us Donald Trump is what gave us Dylan Roof. And though we don't need to publicize the guy's name, we do need to mention that in the last couple of days, during the past week, the verdicts came in, and Dylan Roof, of course, found guilty of the murders of the folks in the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston in June of 2015. Of course, famously tragic event, and I don't think anybody doubted for the outcome of this thing, but there's some shakeout from it nonetheless. Jamel writing, by way of background, on June 16th, 2015, Donald Trump, that's what happened in June of 2015. You know what, I can't even remember if I know the date of the shooting offhand. And that might seem a little bit disrespectful to the folks who were lost or were taken from us in the shooting. And I suppose it is that I haven't committed that to memory. But I do deal with an awful lot of shootings, I must say. And not usually the intentional ones. So things do get a bit jumbled up for me. But the beginning of the piece here, June 16, 2015, Donald Trump took the stage at his eponymous tower in New York City and announced his bid for the White House. His message was clear. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everyone else's problems, Trump said. A day later, there's her answer. In South Carolina, 21-year-old Dylan Roof walked into Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston where members were holding Bible study. I'll spare you the details. He killed 9 people, including the pastor, Reverend Clement Pickney, who was also a state senator, by the way. Again, a good time to remind ourselves of that. Before he arrived at the church, Roof posted a manifesto on his website, a racist tirade that expressed his motives. The message was also clear. Integration has done nothing but bring whites down to the level of brute animals, wrote Roof, which I'll prove to you by acting as a brute animal right now. Indeed, when read together, Trump's announcement and Roof's manifesto offer a duet in racial grievance. Now, there will be people who push back on that immediately and say, you can't possibly. I mean, sure, they happened one day after the other, but they're not related. Well, Jamel's going to sell us something different here. And I got another piece somewhere, if I can dig it up and read it, that might help make the point. When Mexico sends its people, you remember this when Trump said, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. Neither of you are Mexican, of course. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us, of course. Not correct grammar, but they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Thank you. Hispanics are obviously a huge problem for America, Roof wrote. But there are good Hispanics and bad Hispanics. It's coming from more than Mexico, Trump said. It's coming from all over South and Latin America. And it's coming probably from the Middle East. But we don't know because we have no protection and we have no competence. We don't know what's happening. And it's got to stop, and it's got to stop fast. Next up, Dylan Roof again. The first website I came to was the Council of Conservative Citizens. Roof wrote, there were pages upon pages of these brutal black-on-white murders. By the way, he capitalizes white, and obviously not black. I was in disbelief. From this point, I researched deeper and found out what was happening in Europe. I saw that the same things were happening in England and France and in all the other Western European countries. Again, I found myself in disbelief. Why didn't you stay there? Trump wanted to make America great again, where America was a metonym for a traditional industrial and white America, set against the rising tide of racial threats from Hispanic immigrants and black protesters to Muslim refugees and the specter of radical Islamic terrorism. With his promise to restore the moral, cultural, and political dominance of that white America, Trump grabbed the reins of a Republican Party and never let go. Roof, in his own telling, wanted to awaken white America to the alleged threats of blacks and other non-whites. We have no skinheads, no real KKK, and no one doing anything but talking on the internet, he wrote. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it on in the real world, and I guess it has to be me. I alone can fix it, is essentially the expressed intent here. Thursday, Roof was found guilty of hate crimes and other charges by a federal jury, and Donald Trump is elected, he wasn't elected that day, but is president-elect of the United States. There's no causal relationship between Trump and Roof, no tangible link between the two events. From a certain view, this means they're unrelated, but that view is too narrow. Look at what radicalized Roof, at least in his own telling. Propaganda from white supremacist groups like the Council of Conservative Citizens, forums for white nationalists and anti-Semites, a narrative that told him he was oppressed, a victim of diversity in a nation overrun by black crime. At the church, say survivors, Roof exploded in grievance. Y'all are raping our white women, he reportedly said. Y'all are taking over the world. Boy, they're taking over that world. It's amazing, the progress they're making taking over the world. These ideas were once marginal, but in the past year, they've been pulled into the mainstream. by Trump and his presidential campaign. Trump has broadcast racial propaganda and anti-Semitic messages. His children have shared racist memes and reached out to the white supremacist personalities. His campaign chairman, Steve Bannon, now chief strategist to Trump, pushed these narratives as CEO of Breitbart. You all know about that, a website where black crime gets its own vertical and whose most famous writers lead online mobs of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. In the world of Bannon and Breitbart, white America is under siege by dark-skinned people and their white liberal enablers. Likewise, Roof's manifesto reveals a belief system in which a white America needs defenders from black criminals and other racialized threats. By his own account, Roof was radicalized by the killing of Trayvon Martin and the trial of George Zimmerman. He believed Martin attacked Zimmerman in an instance of black-on-white crime. Here's what Breitbart published on Martin's death and the trial. A breaking news story claiming Martin had drugs, quote, in his system. A witness account claiming that Martin had attacked Zimmerman, MMA style. Ooh, I thought they loved MMA. And an op-ed denouncing President Obama as a race baiter for sympathizing with Martin. In the past year, the website has alleged that outlets such as YouTube censor videos on black-on-white crime. Roof's worldview also fits comfortably with Breitbart-inflected rhetoric that represents global special interests as Jewish financial elites and treats all immigration as a dangerous imposition on the country. She wants virtually unlimited immigration and refugee admissions from the most dangerous regions of the world to come into our country and to come into Minnesota, and you know it better than anybody, Trump said, referring to Clinton in the final days of the campaign. Her plan will import generations of terrorism, extremism, and radicalism into your schools and throughout your community. You already have it. Roof's depiction of black Americans as violent and dangerous is just a few steps away from Trump's depiction of black communities as violent and dangerous hellscapes that threaten the safety of the entire nation. Poverty, rejection, horrible education, no housing, no homes, no ownership, crime at levels nobody has seen, said Trump, painting a dystopian picture of black life for a nearly all-white crowd of rallygoers in Ohio. You can go to the war zones in countries that we're fighting and it's safer than living in some of our inner cities. Trump did not cause Roof, but their temporal proximity reveals thematic connections between the two. Trump, the self-proclaimed billionaire who blames immigrants and Muslims for America's problems, and Roof, the struggling young man who blames black Americans and others for his stagnation. And if Trump embodies a white reaction to perceived decline in a changing world, then Roof represents the backlash in its most extreme and virulent form. Both Roof's violence and Trump's demagoguery flow from a shared swamp of resentment. The same white nationalists who led Roof down a path of hate and evil now gather in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the election of Trump as a triumph for their movement. Roof's crime is so monstrous that it may rankle to put him on the same continuum as Trump. But to see both with clear eyes is to see the link between demonization and aggression, between Trump's rhetoric simmering with menace and the wave of harassment, intimidation, and outright violence that followed his victory. It's to see both Donald Trump and Dylan Roof as heralds of the darkest forces in American life, to see their common heritage as a rising tide of white identity and white nationalism. If Trump shares a heritage with Roof, then his victory is a painful asterisk on the outpouring of unity and hope that followed the Charleston shootings. Clem, the pastor, understood that justice grows out of recognition of ourselves and each other, that my liberty depends on your being free too, said President Obama in his eulogy for the Reverend Pinckney, a remarkable meditation on racism, forgiveness, and Christian grace. That history can't be a sword to justify injustice or a shield against progress, but must be a manual for how to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, how to break the cycle, a roadway to a better world. We honored the sacrifice of the dead, and we asked God for guidance, and we took the Confederate flag down from its perch in South Carolina's capital, an expression, in Obama's words, of the amazing changes that have transformed this state and this country for the better, because of the work of so many people of goodwill, people of all races striving to form a more perfect union. Then just 16 months and a few days later, we gave Donald Trump the White House. We didn't avoid the mistakes of the past. We swerved in their path. We didn't break the cycle. We strengthened it. Some of the same people who united around the Charleston 9 cast a ballot for the man who demanded murder for the Central Park 5. Seduced by demagoguery on the promise of new benefits and restored status, millions of Americans rejected the racial egalitarianism of Obama's more perfect union in favor of a renewed color caste. The painful truth is that Obama's optimism was misplaced. Yes, Roof will face justice, but the ideas that radicalized him will thrive. Not just as an amorphous force in American life, but as an active presence in American politics. They will thrive in the West Wing. They will thrive in the Oval Office. They will thrive in rebuke to Barack Obama himself, what he stands for, and what he means. Quite a flourish at the end. And now I have to try and find this other piece, which I think was entered into Pocket as a tweet from, I really have to find it in order to be able to credit it properly, but from one of the reporters most closely covering the Bundy clan and Malheur Wildlife Refuge standoff and the Bundy Ranch standoff and the sort of white separatist streak that runs through that group most closely. And it's been a while, but she actually, gosh, I need like 5 minutes to thumb through here and find this thing. But I really need better like labeling and tagging in this thing in Pocket. It's just too bad. But anyway, I'm gonna find it. I'm determined to find it. There we are. JJ McNabb. That's who I'm looking for. She's the reporter, and you can follow her on Twitter. Just use her name, JJ McNabb, MacNab. And this was an article. Wow, when did she tweet this? This is from November 16th. I've been holding on to this. There's this one article on this movement, she says, that really stuck with me 17 months later, and it's about Dylan Roof. And it's in the Daily Beast, and I'm going to open it up and we'll share it at least for a couple of minutes and see what connection was made a month ago by, who wrote this? By Jacob Siegel. Now I would bet you probably echoing or was echoed by Jamel in the piece he just wrote, but I haven't read them both side by side yet. This will be interesting for me as well. Again, Daily Beast, Jacob Siegel, and flagged for us by J.J. McNabb, writer on anti-government extremism at Forbes.com, by the way, and a recommended follow. Dylan Roof, 4chan, and the new online racism. Sounds like we're mining the same vein here, but with a couple extra strands thrown in. 4chan's trolling culture didn't just birth Guy Fawkes hacktivism. It also inspired the racist and neo-fascist sites where the Charleston terrorist lurked. And, of course, where Donald Trump's army lurked as well. To understand Dylan Roof's thinking, he tells us, we have to go back to 2012, to Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman. That was the moment, Roof writes in his manifesto, where he was reborn as a white nationalist. Which nation? We're not really sure because, of course, he's being photographed burning the American flag and wearing a jacket with the flags of the old apartheid-era South Africa national flag and the flag of Rhodesia, which, of course, overthrew its apartheid system and became Zimbabwe later on. Anyway, that's the moment, he says. Roof's inspirations are clear in a way that his psychology is not. They go back further than the Martin case into centuries of American history and along another path, less clearly marked, to the peak years of a now widespread internet culture, when a new kind of reactionary sensibility was hatched. A reactionary, defiantly antisocial politics has been emerging for the last decade. It was well known under the auspices of trolling and well hidden by its pretense of tricksterism. It was actually juvenile fascism and vitriolic racism, but because it grinned and operated in cyberspace, it was a sensation when it first appeared less than a decade ago. Excitable theorists, bored journalists, and naive political activists looked at its strange adolescent face and pronounced on its revolutionary potential. But then, of course, it won the presidency. So now you're stuck with acknowledging it, I guess. According to the accepted wisdom, Trolls were fiercely apolitical pranksters up until they put on Guy Fawkes masks and became the radical progressives, interestingly, known as Anonymous. And I don't know, I couldn't characterize Anonymous as anything in particular at this point. It's far too diverse for that. But anyway, Anonymous, though, doesn't have a monopoly on trolling's political legacy. They are only its nominally left-ish, I would say, wing manifestation. Something else has been growing in the online ferment that came out of something that Anonymous and its supporters want to disown. A politics that is temperamentally of the right, not quite coherent, though Anonymous isn't always either, but unified by certain passions, a conspiratorial bigotry and anti-black racism above all. This is another legacy of 4chan, the infamous online message board that spawned trolling culture. It's a different branch of politics than the hacktivism associated with Occupy Wall Street and the Arab Spring, but its roots are the same. While Anonymous has gotten most of the attention, the trolls they left behind on 4chan have seen their influence spread as well, though without a catch-all name or striking avatar to easily refer to them. You can see this other side of trolling's inheritance spreading on the popular sites like Reddit and the widespread adoption of the rhetorical style they developed using bombast and absurdism to hide racist tropes in conceptual riddles. If Roof was not directly shaped by that internet culture, he nonetheless moved in the world it helped create. We know that Dylan Roof had a history of taking drugs and that friends say he had expressed interest in committing a mass shooting, but little else about his psychological state leading up to the massacre. We know from what he told the woman he left alive to explain what he'd done, since he apparently intended to kill himself, and from his manifesto that he believed he had no choice but to murder defenseless black people. He specified defenseless. He wanted a slaughter, not a fight, in service to his white nationalist ideology. And we know where the ideas in Dylan Roof's manifesto first appeared, almost verbatim on a neo-fascist website inspired by 4chan's politics. Back to Trayvon Martin. If there's a single event that sparked the current period of social unrest, the national controversy around race and policing, and the largest protest movement of President Obama's second term, it is the night in February 2012, when a mixed-race Florida man, alarmed by the presence of an unarmed black teenager in his community, confronted and killed him after a struggle. The fault line exposed by the killing of Martin is still sending out aftershocks. It inspired the Black Lives Matter movement and its more radical offshoots, including a group that named itself after Martin, despite objections from his family, and became notorious after leading a chant for calling for dead cops in New York. If that even, I'm still not even 100% clear that actually happened the way it is referenced, but it is linked, and you can take a look at the source for that claim, I guess, if you take a look at this article. The Martin case and the mainstream media's handling of it, marred by both casual slanders of Martin and outright distortions about Zimmerman, both sides, reverberated in the internet's ideological echo chambers, the former inspiring the nascent protest movement that reemerged in Ferguson, the latter inspiring a right-wing counter-movement online. A story that had started on Twitter before it was picked up by news continued to spread on the populist internet. The racial and political divisions revealed by the perceptions of Martin's death and the media's handling of it attracted activists to the cause. Some organized protests. One anonymous internet user hacked Martin's email and social media accounts and posted the results online in an effort to depict him as a thug and drug user and justify his shooting death. The hacker, who went by the name Clannon, get it, posted an edited slideshow version of the messages stolen from Martin's accounts. Clannon, as the name suggested, was a white supremacist and a member of 4chan's political message board. That would be /Paul, which is where the hacks were first posted. I'm not 100% clear on how 4chan organizes itself, Reddit with the slashes and this and that, but maybe those of you are. You'll see it in print. The event that truly awakened me, Dylan Roof wrote before walking into the church in South Carolina, was the Trayvon Martin case. It's not all that far from the mainstream of American discourse to the places where Roof dwelled online, but the distances get skewed by perspective. The organized political groups that inspired Roof, like the Council of Conservative Citizens, have, while courting influence, been considered disreputable for decades. That's a far cry from the kind of ambivalent, if not adulatory treatment offered to the avatars of 4chan's bleeding-edge web culture, who were feted by academics and journalists, even as their much-pondered trolling cleared out a space online for a new breed of fascist websites like the one Roof appears to have visited online. There's something immediately familiar about the Daily Stormer, where whole passages of Roof's manifesto first appeared. Its name is taken from Hitler's paper of record, the Nazi propaganda organ Der Stürmer. The site owes as much, perhaps more, to the style and mode of political rhetoric developed on the 4chan message board as it does to any tract published by the KKK or the American Nazi Party. The parallels between Roof's manifesto and the comments on the Daily Stormer, written under the name Aryan Blood 88, suggest either that Roof was the commenter or he visited the site often enough to have plagiarized it for his manifesto. In response to the connection, the site's proprietor, Andrew Anglin, has repudiated Roof's crime and publicly disavowed violence, while endorsing many of Roof's views. Anglin did not respond to multiple requests for an interview. Before running the Daily Stormer, the 30-year-old Anglin ran a site called Total Fascism. Makes it sound like a discount store, doesn't it? Like many other Americans his age, he is fluent in digital culture and its unique approach to racial hatred. His popularity, the site's traffic has grown continuously since 2013, the LA Times reported, comes as much from knowing his audience as from his ideas. Is he dapper? One has to wonder. A lot of people on the internet prefer to write long essays, which a lot of people don't read, which have a limited audience. He told the LA Times about the founding of the Daily Stormer, sounding like any other online editor. It's normalizing him, of course. I wanted something punchy and funny and enjoyable to read. And then he added, I believe white people deserve their own country. That's punchy and funny, isn't it? Anglin, who occasionally writes the white nationalist version of media criticism and devotes much of his coverage to what he sees as the Jewish-controlled liberal establishment's cover-up of black-on-white crime, has studied the digital landscape. He cites 4chan as a touchstone and looks to Reddit as the natural arena in which to expand his neo-fascist enterprise. His site exists in a feedback loop with both of them exchanging ideas and members alike. Daily Stormer is a perfect example for me of the influence 4chan has had on the rest of the messaging machine for white supremacy. Keegan Hanks of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups, tells me, Hanks has written about Reddit's emergence as the single largest gathering place for racists online and how he first sussed out the connection between Roof and the Daily Stormer. He sees the style of racism originally perfected on 4chan's message boards, where the racism is only as effective as the meme that spreads it, as a template for Anglin's site. A lot of the same images, a lot of the same rhetorical styles are being emulated on Daily Stormer, and it's pretty successful. The website has taken off. The memeing, obviously, worked wonders. It got Donald Trump and his kids and all of his surrogates tweeting them during the election, pretending they didn't know where they came from or what they meant. The Daily Stormer has succeeded by marketing itself to younger people. Racism's hip. Who prefer droll commentary to the stern politics of an older generation of racist sites, and crucially, by hitching its fascism to a wider reaction against political correctness and left-wing activism. And bitches who hate my video games, I add, to help you connect it to the rest of these things. Oh, and I didn't even have to do that, because the very next sentence says, even the most rabid game gators, men's rights activists, and anti-social justice warriors tend not to think of themselves as fascists. Anglin and others like him want to change that by radicalizing the center and moving the discourse onto their own grounds. That effort has been aided invaluably by the anonymous shock troops on the internet message boards. Like an incantation, the word trolling has been used for years to put observers in a trance where they can't see what's in front of them. Trolls, meanwhile, have been remarkably predictable creatures. A staple of the form is the over-the-top embrace of racial epithets and old blood libels. Nominally, the trolls, like punk rockers, Dadaists, and countless others before them, were reveling in breaking taboos. It was never clear to what end. Were those bad words and old slanders being bandied around as a kind of satire, demystifying ingrained prejudices, or were they the sharp points at the edge of free speech, a way of insisting that no idea could be off limits? No one was quite sure, perhaps not even the trolls. From that brew of sincerity and irony, 4chan members, under the watchful eye of the press and the internet's self-appointed experts, figured out how to make ancient blood hatreds feel like something new again. Redditors, as the cycle goes, then took those ideas and helped popularize them. 4chan and Reddit are not the only places that have incubated and helped normalize racism online, nor are these two vast and varied communities reducible to their most vile members or their worst innovations. Reddit contains exponentially more posts that helpfully explain scientific concepts than racist screeds. 4chan, which loves to be hated only up to the point where it squirms away and insists it was just joking, has a board devoted to literature that has produced some of the sharpest and most inventive literary criticism I've read online. Not me, but our writer here, in threads that improvised their brilliance then disappeared. But they are also, as fascists and white nationalists clearly understand, powerful laboratories for inseminating and spreading darker ideas. It's hard to talk about the internet at all without talking about 4chan and Reddit. They are two of its largest communities and exert an outsized influence in their respective roles as the web's myth and mall. Both are welcoming to bigots, frothing at the mouth racists, calm racists who just want to make endless posts about black-on-white violence and genetic inferiority, and every variety of bigotry in between. Reddit defends the existence of communities like r/guess the kikes and r/watch it niggers die, yow, and r/raping women on free speech grounds. We're just, wow. That atmosphere has attracted right-wing extremists who left or were booted from other more established sites like Stormfront, where moderators, aware of the scrutiny of law enforcement, have stricter posting rules. When I asked Brad Griffin, who runs the website Occidental Dissent, and whose father-in-law formerly ran the Council of Conservative Citizens that Roof cited in his manifesto, about white nationalism, he tells me, I consider myself more of a Southern nationalist, but I wouldn't get too picky about the distinction. Wink, wink. By 2001, Griffin says, the white nationalist movement was already mostly online, and it's been that way ever since. People who are more extreme have a harder time posting and commenting on Stormfront, so they migrate to other websites. Those sites include Reddit and 4chan. According to Griffin, the atmosphere on the newer sites is more guttural, Griffin says. It's not so much white nationalist as it becomes anti-black. People who are just interested in the complete dehumanization of black people tend to migrate to sites like Reddit, which is less controlled. Can you believe this? I believe 4chan is more of a troll forum, Griffin says, using the indeterminate language shared by its enemies and defenders, both. I'm a lot less familiar with that, he says. 4chan, insofar as anyone can speak for its anonymous double-talking membership, has long maintained that much of its racism is really just performance designed to rattle the mainstream. We've been over that ground, right? Which brings us back to the troll, the totemic figure of the last great internet epic that peaked 5 or so years ago. The troll was a creature largely born out of 4chan's /B board. 4chan's many boards have spawned countless memes like Rickrolling and LOL cats, which came to define a dominant online sensibility. The /B board, intended for random posts that didn't fit anywhere else, became known as the Anything Goes forum and the home of the trolls. In its wider use on the web, trolling was a kind of cruel prank enabled by the internet's anonymity. On 4chan, because trolling was central to members' identities, an ethos of one-upmanship evolved, with pranksters always looking for more boundaries to transgress and new nerve endings to poke to maintain their edge and capacity for amusement. Early on, after 4chan formed in 2003, its users swarmed an online video game. The largely teenage players of Habbo Hotel watched 4chaners fill their screens with racist invective while they marched their characters into a swastika in the middle of the game. The Habbo Hotel raid, as it's known by 4chan members and the countless websites dedicated to chronicling their exploits, became a key event in the site's lore. That was one kind of trolling. Another version involved gang stalking of an 11-year-old girl online, posting her name and address online, and turning her ritual abuse into a popular meme. Because it's so disgusting, that made it more interesting and titillating for them, I guess. As reports of the trolls bubbled up into the mainstream news, it inspired two dominant reactions. The first was tabloid alarmism about the internet's unfathomable cruelty. 4chan members mocked the sensationalism, implicitly for exaggerating their power. A running gag on the site is that all of its members are hopeless losers, but were also flattered by it and took to calling themselves the Internet Hate Machine. The second kind of reaction to the trolls developed when a faction of 4chan took on its first real cause, the Church of Scientology. In 2008, when the Church of Scientology began suing websites, forcing them to remove videos the church considered private or defamatory, 4chan turned its attention to trolling the Scientologists. Eventually, that produced a schism on 4chan. Some members, inspired by the success going after Scientology and the attention it brought, wanted to take a more activist role. The dedicated trolls rebelled. The activists splintered off and became the collective represented by a Guy Fawkes mask known as Anonymous. The question, what is trolling, was muddied after Anonymous split off and began operating in the political realm. Diffuse by nature, Anonymous had spread globally, and while its impact is debatable, the group has staked out a place for itself as an heir to WikiLeaks' transparency and anti-state activism, and as an advocate for rape victims and political dissidents. Anonymous is one face of trolling's political legacy. The other is preserved on /Paul, or politically incorrect, the 4chan message boards devoted to politics. /Paul started after 4chan's original news board became a shouting match between anonymous racists, not capital A, but lowercase anonymous racists, and capital N Nazis, trying to outdo each other. After a ban, the board returned as /Paul, although I guess it got a lowercase p instead of an uppercase p. Most days, that board resembles nothing so much as the Daily Stormer, with the signal-to-noise dial turned only slightly. On June 22nd, days after Dylan Roof's arrest, the South Carolina murders still dominated the conversation on /Paul. One thread asked, "What made you racist?" In it, the top commentator wrote, "I became racist because my wife was killed by," and they say it here, by an N-word. I've said it before in the same broadcast, but I don't know how I feel about that. But killed, well, we'll just read it. "I became racist because my wife was killed by a nigger," he says, "in an urban area while coming home from work. I was left to raise my only son by myself." That is sad. "I am not that well off financially. It caused a great deal of hardship. I was already pretty racist, though." It's good of him to acknowledge. Below that appeared a number of in-jokes. That is, including a popular meme showing a crying frog meant to mock self-pity. At least one person saying they weren't a racist, one identifying as Asian before explaining how he or she became a racist, and a litany of racism coming out stories. /Paul played a big part in it. One poster wrote about his own racist beginnings. "I came here and just lurked for months. I was astonished at all these terrible racists, but they kept referring to things I had no idea about. Black on white crime, Zionists, World War II, etc. I missed the whole World War II thing he did, I guess. Long story short, you destroyed my perception of the world." It continued. "I'm reading a lot, thinking about starting a garden." What? "Arming myself," oh I see, "and looking for a woman who I can make my wife, and move off into the country with." It's a bit on the nose, but maybe it's trolling. And this last line, "Or I'll go out with a streak of violence." It ends, "haven't decided." If that's a joke, it's awfully dry for one joke being told anonymously in a cloistered room among one's peers. And that's one of the dangers. You can't tell with these guys. How would Roof have been received as a poster on /Paul? He would have been mocked and encouraged, the mockery making the encouragement that much easier to offer. The most famous troll was Andrew Auernheimer, a hacker who called himself Weave W-E-E-V, and became something of a celebrity before he was imprisoned for identity fraud and conspiracy to access a computer without authorization. The thing to know about Weave is that throughout his trolling, as he was being feted by academics and members of the press, he was also spouting off often and publicly about the evils of Jews and blacks. Now that he's had his 41-month sentence vacated and he's out of prison, Auernheimer is sporting a swastika tattoo. The image of the swastika is tilted, one of his friends told me, to suggest that maybe it's just a troll, that it doesn't mean what it means. That same friend, Greg Hausch, a former regular on 4chan who left to help start Anonymous, also told me that away from any audience, Auernheimer fulminates about the dangers of Jewish power in private chat rooms they both use. And last October, after he got out of prison, Auernheimer wrote an article for the Daily Stormer. That piece prompted a confession from a former troll, lamenting trolling's transformation into a festival of reactionary hatred, and that in turn produced a response from the Daily Stormer's Anglin entitled Weave and the Nazi Troll Army. Trolling, as a concept, was always a form of social commentary intended to expose the weakness and hypocrisy of our age, Anglin writes. The language is markedly similar to the description of trolling offered by the academic Gabriella Coleman, whose recent book about Anonymous made her the group's most prominent theorist and advocate. Any presumption of our world's inviolability becomes a weapon, Coleman wrote. Trolls invalidate that world by gesturing toward the possibility for internet geeks to destroy it, to pull the carpet from under us whenever they feel the urge. Anglin's own reverie for trolling continues. The fact that it had been refined into a hardcore right-wing system of Jew hatred and the mockery of self-righteous feminists merely demonstrates that we now know our enemy much better than we did a decade ago, and presumably that we know ourselves a lot better too. It was a natural evolution of a medium and a community which surrounded it. So, we've come full circle, and it's getting harder to pretend that the trolling culture that 4chan created, whatever else it has led to, hasn't also provided a template for neo-fascists. You can't understand 4chan's role, says the Southern Poverty Law Center's Keegan Hanks. You can't understate, I said understand. You can't understate 4chan's role. I constantly see 4chan being mentioned by the more internet and tech-savvy guys in the white supremacist, white nationalist movement. They're getting their content from 4chan. Users there created a large and influential body of work online. It says texts. I'm not even certain what that reference is. Of anonymous, texts of anonymous racism for their other anonymous racists to parse and develop. Maybe the early users meant to skewer the thought police when they screamed racial epithets over and over and made Jews did 9/11 a punchline. But for the people who came after them, those influential trolls and their high-toned defenders, made it that much easier to use those same words and ideas without even the pretense of trolling. Eventually, people showed up on /Paul and the racist subreddits who never knew or cared whether there was a joke to begin with. They came for the racism and have built on that enterprise. Whitney Phillips, an academic who studied 4chan and wrote a book about trolling, contends that the commonly applied idea of trolling is misleading as it focuses on intention rather than impact. Phillips argues that trolls, despite their reputation as innovators, have never invented anything. Trolls are cultural scavengers, she wrote. Trolls engage in a process I describe as cultural digestion. They take in, regurgitate, and subsequently weaponize existing tropes and cultural sensitivities. The Daily Stormer's approach is to scavenge the culture while incorporating satire as both a skewer and a defense in service of an explicitly racist political program. Meanwhile, Reddit, the self-declared front page of the internet, now hosts what might be the web's largest network of racist forums. Members on those sites spent days cheering Roof's crime, while others debated whether or not the killings were a good thing for the racist cause. That's one reason Anglin called Reddit fertile ground for recruitment in a post about how to draw more of its users into the white nationalist orbit, which, by the way, is happening in parallel, according to people like Trump and other national security alarmists all the time in the radical Islamic terrorism sphere, but no one seems to notice it happening right here at home because it happens in service of their political agendas. So forget it. Back to the article. In it, he wrote, "We brought 4chan over to our side long ago. Now we need to focus on red pilling, get it? Matrix. Reddit. Red pilling in this context means awakening the users to racist beliefs. Reddit and 4chan both came up repeatedly on England's site as sources of inspiration. Where Reddit is fertile ground for recruitment, 4chan is treated as a kindred spirit to the Daily Stormer. On 4chan's /Paul, there have been a number of startling posts straightforwardly backing Roof's worldview and advocating white nationalism. Not startling for the racism, which has defined the board since it began, but for their earnestness. A lot of them don't seem to be bothering much with the anarchic tricksterism. Many users are indistinguishable from doctrinaire cultural conservatives of the racist variety. They just happen to curse more. At the beginning, Anonymous was just about lashing out at everything. Northwestern professor Peter Ludlow was quoted in January 2014 telling the writer of an Esquire article about the group's future and Aurenheimer's imminent imprisonment. Now they've grown up politically, he continued. They're starting to understand the real priorities. It's not about lulls and pranks anymore. Lashing out at everything brings to mind another word that came up often when people discussed Anonymous, nihilism. That by itself should have set off alarms. There are no packs of nihilists. There might be a few scattered in the wild, but never in a group. Any social order committed to the total renunciation of every belief wouldn't be around long enough to tell its story, let alone gather day after day to chat on the internet. People who say they want to burn down everything invariably choose where to set their fires. The fact that 4chan and its trolls staked their expressive rights and aesthetic identity to tormenting women and black people is perhaps not surprising. Bright young things who felt smarter than a society that marginalized them, they used the internet's emancipatory anonymity to abuse people who at once scared them and whom they took to be weaker. How that was ever taken to be something new or revolutionary is another story. And we're actually nearly at the end here, but we're, of course, running up against our time limits. I definitely recommend that you take a closer look at the article, perhaps ponder it with a little more time on your hands. Interestingly, the penultimate paragraph here refers here to his essay, an essay in The Nation by Adrian Chen, who makes the case for why progressives ought to be wary of Anonymous. And Adrian Chen, you'll remember, is the one who earlier in the week, I think, or perhaps at the end of last week, we read, mentioning that we ought perhaps to be wary about the propaganda of making us, or bringing us to the understanding that Russian propaganda and hacking were at heart what influenced the outcome of the election. Adrian Chen, interestingly tied up in all of this. Lots of interesting stuff to ponder over the weekend. A totally different take on the end of the show. And unfortunately, sometimes that means the headlines of the day suffer, but don't fear, because Angle of Repose Friday is up next on the after show, and they've got the following lined up for you. Twitter blocks federally funded domestic fusion spy centers from accessing user data. See how long that lasts. Trump's pick for Interior Secretary has troubling ties to the neo-Confederate group that inspired, you'll never guess, Dylan Roof. And Scott Baio wants to file charges against the wife of Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer for grabbing him by his chachi. That's a nice line there, Justice. All of that coming up next. Plus, of course, the great stuff on the last half I'll tell you about
From
later.
Daily Co's Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Yeah, back to the more immediate headlines of the day. Just now realizing they may lose their health insurance, shocked Trump voters are frantically calling Planned Parenthood. And what did Donald Trump know about Vladimir Putin's attempt to hack the election? And when did he know it? All of that coming up next on the After Show with Wink and Justice. We'll talk again next week.